bought the real syrup. I've just been making it. So.
I'll get that back. I forgot I had it. I just found it the other day.
No problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, find your seats. Find a seat, please.
Huh?
Now
it's
we're
working.
Yeah.
People are telling me it sounds good.
Okay.
I'm just trying to look at it myself. It's just on a little bit of a lag.
Find a seat, please. Find a seat.
Okay, cool.
We can grab the free stuff at intermission. Find a seat.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Don't worry, no one's going to shoot a spit back because you want to get it back to your head. Real problems.
Find a seat, please. All right, we good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I want to welcome everyone this evening to the March 8th, 2024 meeting of the New Jersey Antique Radio Club here at InfoAge. It's a nice crowd. Do appreciate that. Are there any new faces in the crowd? Mr. Porter. You want to get up and say a few words about yourself?
Yeah. Just
What do you collect? What do you collect?
Mostly communications equipment, communications receivers, and older communications receivers from the 40s and the 50s, and anything like the 60s up. Even some of the newer stuff, but I'm a ham operator. I have everything from very new to
What's your call?
WB2TFG.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So,
All right, you're amongst friends. What you're describing, we are all in.
okay. Yeah. Well, I guess.
you found the right place.
Yeah. I mean, if you.
About how many radios do you have? How many communication receivers?
Oh, please.
No, if you can't count, you belong here. Believe me.
If you can't count, you don't have enough. If you can count,
I don't know, something. They're in the attic and they're just. So I guess, well, at least I don't feel alone now.
No reason to. No. We all have that same affliction. Yes, we do.
Yeah, my friend who came, he only likes new equipment. He calls all my stuff clunker junk. And he was like, he saw my basement, and he's like,
Well, he wouldn't like the club then.
I keep threatening him though. He has his shed where I operate when I'm up there at his house. Said I'll rent space out there for more radios in there.
Good.
Make him real happy.
All right, good. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. All right. All right, let's move on to infirmary report. All right, unfortunately, I spoke with our webmaster, Dave Sika, about 2 weeks ago, and he's not doing well. All right, he doesn't seem to know what's wrong with him. His doctors don't seem to know what's wrong with him. They suggested it's, you know, that catchphrase, long COVID. Okay? He seems to have neuralgia in his feet and his legs, and he's having a hard time moving, and he hasn't been coming out. Obviously, he'd be here, you know, attending to our AV this evening, but he's not. Look, give him a buzz. I gave him a buzz this week. I didn't get any answer. I think, you know, just give him a call. All right, we have Len Newman. Raise your hand. No, the other one, Len. No. All right, this is a twofer. Harry, raise your hand as far as you can. Your arm as far as you can. All right, there we go. All right, now, we have the same affliction, all right? No. It's called, 3 weeks ago, an ice storm that you both got to experience, right?
That was it?
That was it, right?
That's the ticket, yeah.
Yeah. So are you both on the mend, I hope?
Well, yeah, I can get along. But it was Sunday going to church of all things. I stepped out of the car.
This was lucky.
I'm not gonna say anything about that. No, not at all. Nothing at all.
I got touch that one.
No. All right. Again, anybody has anything to report for infirmary? Any member that we should know about? Let me know, please. It's nice to be in touch with people because I noticed that none of us are getting any younger. Okay, so that's important. All right. On to old business. Last Saturday, March 2nd, we held our winter repair clinic here in this room. We welcome our new expert restorer, Scott Marshall. Scott, raise your hand, please. All right, and how did you do? Did you feel good at the end of the day?
I had a great time.
All right, good. We really enjoy it, and we're happy to have you. I wrote an article in the broadcast when it comes out, and that's a review of our event that day. Anyway, all right. Good times had by all. Any other comments? Anybody? Bobby? Anybody else?
I got a thank you email from Tom. He actually sent me a picture of the radio that I worked on.
All right, Tom Lee, and you had a Philco 280
yes.
console.
So it was just it looked similar to the one that's got the slant front with all the push buttons that always never work right. So something like that. But that went well.
And also, look, I think by now everybody knows that Bob Bennett is really Radio Wild on YouTube, and you put out the video, yes?
I did not.
You didn't put it out yet?
No, I didn't put it out yet. I didn't get a lot of stuff to put a video together. I'll probably put something together. I just haven't had time to do it. It's been crazy.
So that's why I should have read my own note with a question mark next to it.
That's all right. It's not you. That was my problem, not yours.
Okay. Again, Radio Wild on YouTube. Look them up. All right. JD Auction Services had an amazing auction on Saturday, February 24th. 420 lots went under the hammer in record time, with a large number of fully restored radios playing throughout the hall. Darren, come on up. If you don't know, this is half of JD Auction Services. Darren Hoffman.
So we're currently dealing with several estates with an unusually impressive collection of the desirable stuff, the cathedrals, tombstones, Atwater Kent cathedrals, Philco cathedrals, unusual cathedrals, Zenith tombstones. We're going to have, at the next auction, we're going to have a nice big Zenith shutter dial, high tube count console. A handful of consoles, not too many, kind of mostly better consoles. but a lot of nice 30s radios, a lot of nice cathedrals, a lot of nice tombstones, a lot of rare cathedrals, Atwater, Kent, and the majority of them are restored. It's going to be out at Kutztown. Yeah, at Kutztown, and it's going to be March, I don't want to give you the wrong date here because I do that. My head, I got it. What's it? Yeah, 23rd, right, yeah. So we're March 23rd out at Kutztown in the White Room, and then we're going to be back April 20th, I believe it is. Yeah, April 20th, we're going to be back in Jackson on County Line Road at the Firehouse. And both of those auctions are going to have a nice selection of 1930s radios as well as tubes, lots of tubes. You know, those glass things, no air in them, we're not supposed to have air in them. Nice plastic radios, probably a little bit of audio equipment, all the good stuff, no garbage. We try to keep the garbage out, right? So come on out, and I think you'll enjoy it.
All right, thanks, Darren. Thank you very much. JD Auction Services, ready to service us. We do know that. We want to thank Darren and John for an incredible job they did that Saturday, too.
Well, we appreciate everybody coming out, because you can't have an auction without it. Nice to see the stuff going to good new homes, because a lot of this stuff's been locked up in collections for a long time.
Yeah, that's what's breaking out lately with people going to that great big ham fest and swap meet in the sky. Yeah. Okay. Any other old business before I move on to new business? Okay. Al and Tom. Tom is not with us this evening. Okay. Would you like to step up, Al, and tell us about the results of our broadcast band DX contest that happened in January?
Okay, very good. This is going to be just a quick recap, and there'll be complete results in the broadcast group. But we had 29 logs from 20 contestants, and this was the 25th DX contest. Time flies when you're having fun. And I'll just sort of quickly go down this. First place overall and first in the pre-1945 communication receiver category was Joe Devonshire up in Maine with 10,153 points on a Hallicrafters SX-25. Second place, which was in the open class, Frank Fesco with a Sanguian radio of some sort, 9,700 at some points. Bunch of open class radios in that end of the scoring thing. And then first in transistor radios was Owen Gaborth with 85.99 points in Zenith Royal 2000. Right behind him was Frank Fesco, first in the home receivers class with the Zenith Success 527. First in ultralight, 9th place overall was Steve Baracha, C. Crane Pocket Radio. First in Class H, which is the All-American 456 class, was Aaron Hunter with the Woolarock 3-1A. Right behind him, 1920s battery sets, first place, Neville Greenow with an Atwater Kent Model 20. 17th overall, first in TRF, Joe Devonshire up in Maine again with an Atwater Kent Model 40. Right behind him, primitive, we counted that as 2 tubes. Paul Mondock sneaked in there with a Night-Kit Space Banner, which has 2 tubes plus a rectifier, so we counted that as his power supply and said, yeah, okay, that'll do, it's a regen. And he had 73.38 points. John Riccolo, well, no, that was farther down. And then first in crystal sets was Mario Volpe. He has a real interesting reproduction of a 1920s crystal set called an Airwave Explorer, and he turned in a pretty nice log with 5,500 and some points. So like I say, we'll get the complete results out. If you just can't wait, I've got a piece of paper you can look at, but basically we'll get it in the broadcast.
Right, thank you, thank you. Not to say that we can't still DX. You know, we can still DX, right? It's our time. And it's part of our ancestry, so to speak. Okay. All right. On to new business. Harry Clancer is our treasurer, and he happens to be here this evening. And he will give us the club's financial report for year ending 2023. Harry, come right up.
Okay. Well, we began 2023 with $19,979 in the treasury, and we had quite a good year, actually. Auction sales were very high, $8,400 in 23. They beat out dues. All the way down to sales of parts. The net value of our sales of parts was $65. But anyway, so the total income for the year was $19,486. Now, we had some expenses, of course. The big one is miscellaneous. The net was $31.61. The holiday party came up after that. Remember, we subsidized our docents here.
Yes, we
holiday party.
Docents.
Celebrated our docents. And the net cost of the holiday party was $2,945. The museum came in at $2,000, insurance $1,900, all the way down to cost of meetings, like supplies for things like this, and the cost of the space at $870. So our total expenditures for the year were $11,871, for a net change during the year of positive $7,615. So we ended up the year with $27,595. So, as someone said, we can do something with that.
And we do.
And we do, and we can do more. But it was a good year. And the auctions really did make a big difference. That's it.
And those auctions happen to do with JD Auction Services, and we have to thank them for that too.
Well,
and we also have to thank Ray Chase for putting so much of that together.
Yes, Ray
does all the hard stuff.
all the work here.
Ray, just stand up and show your face. All right. Okay. All right. And speaking of finances, thank you, Harry, by the way. Thank you very much. This week, the local Wall Township High School has posted the NJARC Pre-Engineering Academy Scholarship Applications. This is a recurring award given to a high school senior going on to study in the fields of STEM. This is our second year of giving the award, okay? And the award will be given out on award night, which I believe is May 15th, all right? And obviously I'll be there for that. So it's something I've always wanted to do for the club. And as Harry said about monies, it's good that we are able to give away a scholarship to these folks. And it is recurring, so it's great that we can do this. Okay. In just 2 weeks, March 16th, all right? What do we got?
Parsippany.
We got our Parsippany PAL Hamfest Swap Meet Show, all right? And believe me, we're filling up pretty fast, but there are some tables available, and I will fit you in. Now, I can't say that it's going to be like last fall, where I actually turned away vendors. That was amazing. First time in my life I've ever done that for the club, but I had to do it. It was just the numbers were too high, and the amount of people in the room would have exceeded what was posted on the wall, And as you may know, there's a little guy that runs around. He's the fire marshal, and he checks all these things. So I just had to keep it under that number. Okay. Oh, yes. I was contacted by a friend of the club, Joe Connor. Okay. I think everybody knows Joe. He's not a member, Joe. I wish you were a member, but you're not. It's up to you. But you are a friend to the club. And he's already told me he will be bringing some receivers and radios to Parsippany PAL that we will be auctioning off at future club meetings, as we usually do. And just for our DX member in particular, Dan Gervais up in Montreal. Dan, guess what? We have another Hallicrafter XX24 for you. So come and get it.
You mean 28?
28, I'm sorry, 28. So I'm sure he'll, well, that would make what, 4 of them, he has? Okay. All right. Is there any other old business? How are we doing with docents? I saw it's been tough this month.
This has been a more difficult month than some because we have some people who are borderline having issues, mental health issues, and so on and so forth. Presumably they'll bounce back well.
All right. Are we covered?
We are covered, but it's been tough. Yes. So we always like A, to encourage other people to come and become docents, and B, to always look at my mailings that seem to go out every other day this week, and respond. So, whatever you can.
I talked to Bill Zakowski, and he's back the 15th of April, so he said he's ready.
This is really important because we're getting more and more people than I've ever seen in the museum.
Yes.
I mean, there have been days where it's almost show to show. It's ridiculous.
Well, all I can say, certainly to our DX members who aren't here this evening, if you were within a 25-mile radius of InfoAge, there's really no reason for you not to be spending some time as a docent. Really, 1 day a week, 1 day a month, anything you can possibly do. All right, please, we do need it. Yes?
There's one more thing. We're looking at some new approaches to some of these things. For example,
Harry,
we're looking at...
come on up, come on. No, you put the camera in.
Just a quick thing, it doesn't need camera. One of the approaches is to have docents who are part of the day, who will do the first half of the afternoon or the second half of the afternoon. If you know, it's like fitting bricks. You know, if we can fit the bricks together, the house will be strong. That will be coming out, but not yet.
All right, it's has it never been a battle? It's always been a battle, right?
Yeah, but as Jules said, we're getting a lot more. You and I Wednesday, we had 150 people total. And including 100 and some kids. I mean, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, any other new business anyone who speaks about?
I just want to make an announcement.
Yes.
I don't know if those of you have ever been to any of you have ever been to the Trenton Computer Fair. It's been.
Oh, come on, David. Come on up.
Yeah, I just wanted to apprise everyone that in next Saturday after next, the 16th, is the Trenton Computer Fair. This has been going on since like 1976. This is like the 47th year of it. It's been interesting over the years. As a young man, I went and bought things at the flea market. They still have a flea market. It's nowhere near what it used to be, but it's there. Their theme this year is generative AI. There's bound to be some interesting talks there. They got 50 talks actually there for only $15. So just thought I'd apprise everyone of that if they're interested.
I think that, of course, anybody wants to go there, they can go there after our Hamfest Swamp Meet, which ends at 12 o'clock.
It's open till 3.
Very good. I think way back when, we set up, didn't we set up at that one time, right? Yeah, a long time ago. Jules?
That was a lot of years ago.
Fun fact on visitors. The head of InfoAge estimated that last year we had about 12,000 visitors here.
That's fantastic, isn't it? It's amazing. Finally, people are finding where we are. You know, I probably said this the last time, and I'll probably say it again when I do give out the award, the scholarship award at Wall High School. You know, I talk about InfoAge, I talk about New Jersey Antique Radio Club, and I say we are 2.5 miles from this high school, and I see blank faces in the crowd. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Okay. All right, so let's just move on to Hamshack Corner, which is pretty quick. Did anyone stop in by the New Providence Amateur Radio Club after last JD auction? I meant to stop in, I just didn't have the time. Anybody stop by there? They had the annual flea market and auction. No? Okay. All right. Hopefully it won't step on JD Auction Services the next time either. All right. Gordon, this is for you. Down in North Carolina, April 6th in Raleigh is the North Carolina Hamfest. Okay? And May 17th to the 19th, of course, will be the Dayton Hamfest in Xenia, Ohio, just to keep people appraised. Okay. All right. How about we take a quick recess and sale of our 50/50 tickets? Darren, if you could do that, please. Bill?
Just give me a couple of minutes for things to address everybody.
Come on up, quick.
I'll have them
Come on.
Okay.
Should have been on the new business line, Bill.
I want to take a couple of things. Come on. If you followed the broadcaster, I put together a bunch of USB sticks. I've been catching file programs off the air for years, mainly using internet streaming with my Raspberry Pi and everything. Most of these programs are going to be jazz, blues, but a little bit of rock in there for Rolling Stones Hour, which is a great program. I've left the Grateful Dead off, although I have plenty of copies of that. But it's mainly jazz and blues and everything. There's a couple of special things on here. Like several years ago, there was a guy on the West Coast, Raul, that did a Jazz from the Left program that was broadcast on WRMI shortwave radio and a lot of FM stations. I contacted him, told him I liked it. Could you tell me what stations it's streaming on? So I'd like to listen to it in a little better quality. He sent me the links to the files that he sends to the radio stations, the FM stations. So I have a year's worth of files from that. It's a fantastic program. There's other programs on here for your WBGO. They did a program for years, Portraits in Blue, which described a lot of the blues musicians. I keep trying to fill in the missing episodes.
That was Bob
Porter.
Yeah, that's a great show.
Yep, it's still on 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. They randomly run one, so I catch it every Saturday and see if it fits into any of the ones I'm missing. Anyway, it's 118 gig here, just a subset of what I have. Feel free to take one and enjoy them. If there's not enough, contact me and we'll make arrangements somehow.
Bill, all right, Bill.
Yeah. Oh, would you like to have one?
Sure. All right, let's have a recess, a quick one, all right? Sale of 50/50 tickets. 3 for 2, 3 for 2, 3 for 2.
50/50, $1 each, 3 for 2. Gotta be in it.
Thank you. I could have easily done a couple of terabytes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
I limited.
we can always fill it back up.
I limited down to what I thought the club might want. There's WBMA did a program called Big Band Scene. There's a lot of Sinatra on there. Sounds of Sinatra with Marks.
Can I have one?
Sure. There's
Awesome. Thank you very
also
much.
a program that was called the Rat Pack that was on for a
That's
while.
cool.
Borrow one and return it.
And they or pass it to someone else.
Thank you.
It's a fantastic thing. Starting songs about the Rat Pack guys. And I got one left. Anybody want the last one? No?
Ladies and gentlemen, anyone who has not yet purchased your 50/50 tickets, do so now. 50/50 tickets. You gotta be in it to win it. Last call for the 50/50.
Sorry, I missed it.
a seat. Come on. Find a seat. Find a seat. And the number is... Oh, everybody's quiet after that. Find a seat. Find a seat. You don't have to sit in the same seat you came in with. Come on, find a seat. All right, this evening, for the grand total of $21. $21. Well, it's another game show tonight. All right, we need a volunteer to pick. Oh, I see a volunteer. Right over here. Oh.
Sure. 1, 2, 4, 0, 4, 6. Oh no! You gave me one job and I messed up. 1, 2, 4, 0, 4, 7, 6.
Oh, geez, somebody had a heart attack.
1, 2, 4, 0, 4, 7, 6. No.
Thank you. Now, I trust you, but have to verify. 476, 476. Congratulations. What do I do with the money? Oh, here it is.
Are you going to leave now? We'll wait for
Yeah. I'm out of here. I'll see you
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. All right. Moving right along. So we have, this is the beginning of our guest presenters, guest speakers series. I initiated that, well, last year. I was thinking about what we could do. And we're doing it. And Melissa Ziobro is our first guest speaker. Okay? A quick bio. Quick, all right? All right. She's a professor of history at Monmouth University and a specialist of public history at Monmouth University. She is the administrator of the Monmouth Memories Oral History Program and president of Oral History in the Mid-Atlantic region. She works as a command historian at the U.S. Army Communication Electronics Command, Fort Monmouth, from 2004 to 2011. I can go on, but I won't, because I think it would be better if she gave us a list of the things she's not involved in. And also a mother of two young boys. Okay. So how about a warm welcome for Melissa?
Thank you. I was so excited that I was going to get to talk about Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans history. And then there were brownies too. I was like, wow, could this night get any better? So thank you so much, everybody, for having me. Again, my name is Melissa Ziobro. I'm the Director of Public History at Monmouth University. I also have a new title. I'm the Curator of the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music at Monmouth University. But again, what does that have to do with being here? Well, as it was stated, 20 years ago this month, I started my big girl job as a historian in the Command Historian's Office at Fort Monmouth. So although the base closed in 2011, and we'll talk about that in a bit, I continue to lecture, to publish on various topics related to Fort Monmouth history, because the things that happened there, the men and women, civilian and military, who worked there, they need to be remembered. And so I'm grateful to you all for giving me an opportunity to tell you just a little bit about that history this evening. And I say just a little bit on purpose because, can I see a show of hands? Did anyone ever work at the base or you were stationed at the base? Inevitably in a local group, and I'm sure we've got some folks online. I was given 45 minutes to an hour to speak tonight. We could do an entire semester-long class on Fort Monmouth history, easily. I could come here every night for weeks. So if I don't cover a particular project or piece of equipment that you like, I apologize. It's just because we're going to do an overview in the time that we have, okay? Just a little plug I have to give. This is my new book that's coming out in May, Fort Monmouth, The Army's House of Magic. And I think this is a special book because I rely very heavily on the archival record and on oral histories. So this book really tells the story of Fort Monmouth in the words of those who lived and worked there. So if you are interested in that history, you can pick up this book. It's available for pre-order, or you can get it on Amazon or local booksellers when it comes out in May. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. We're going to talk primarily about Fort Monmouth, but also its satellite installations like Camp Evans here. When does it all start? Well, Fort Monmouth, what will become Fort Monmouth, is founded just after the United States enters World War I. The Great War, as it is then called, breaks out in 1914 after a man by the name of Gavrilo Princip assassinates Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, in June of 1914. This event triggers a complex series of alliances that causes country after country in Europe to declare war on each other for a variety of reasons. We could spend my hour talking about the outbreak of World War I alone, right? For anyone who's interested in World War I history, great book, The Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark. And he talks about how, like sleepwalkers, these countries stumble into this global cataclysm. Suffice it to say, by August of 1914, millions of Europeans are at war. Most thought that the conflict would be over quickly. Of course, that's not the case. Where does the United States stand in all this? Well, when World War I erupts in Europe in the summer of 1914, President Woodrow Wilson here in the United States, he's very involved in the progressive movement, and he pledges neutrality for the United States. That is a position that the majority of Americans heartily favor. We know, of course, that we do eventually enter the war, and, your history buffs, most of you, I'm sure, there's a variety of reasons that we ultimately get dragged into this conflict. Although the United States will be actively involved in World War I for a relatively short period of time, from April of 1917 through November of 1918, the mobilization of the country is extraordinary. Over 4 million Americans will wind up serving in the armed forces, and the U.S. economy will churn out a vast supply of raw material and munitions. Of course, the United States, at this point in our history, we are becoming an industrial superpower. And so we really had the potential to make a great difference in this conflict, and we will. So what is it, in brief, that causes the United States to get involved in the war? It's a variety of reasons, right? Insistence on our trading rights. Our merchant vessels are being sunk in startlingly large numbers in the Atlantic, primarily by U-boats. There is, of course, the sinking of the passenger liner, the Lusitania, in May of 1915. And finally, I think the last straw is really the Zimmerman telegram, in which the Germans essentially tell Mexico, if war breaks out, keep the Americans busy in North America so they can't come over to Europe and make a difference, right? When the text of the Zimmerman note comes out, that's really the last straw, and public opinion in the United States swings firmly into getting involved in World War I. When we get into World War I, it is still unclear who will win. The war had been dragging since 1914. It's a brutal stalemate, primarily due to the trench warfare that typifies the conflict. But the large arrival of Americans from that point on out will make a decisive difference. Although the American military leaves a little bit to be desired because we are rushing to put together this massive military very quickly, there is no enormous force of some 4 million, coming in to help the other side. Okay? So the 4 years of the Great War is going to see millions of deaths, both combatants and civilians, unprecedented levels of carnage, thanks to modern warfare like chemical weapons and tanks and planes. And the Treaty of Versailles, which is signed in 1919 and is supposed to ensure a lasting peace, well, most historians agree that that actually sets up the circumstances for World War II, but that's a whole nother story. But it was out of this conflict that Fort Monmouth was born. When the United States gets into World War I in 1917, the U.S. Army is roughly 200,000 strong. That is so small. I mean, it is never going to make a difference in the war in Europe. And so America has to very quickly decide how big the military is going to be. As I said, some 4 million eventually serve in uniform across the various branches of the military. But now you've got to get these men either, enlisted or drafted. You've got to train them. You've got to equip them, right? It is a massive logistical undertaking. As the military is growing, one thing the U.S. Army is particularly concerned about is communications, right? The Signal Corps at the time that we are getting into World War I is roughly 55 officers and 1,500 men. Totally insufficient to furnish communications, especially across the massive Western Front. And so growing the Signal Corps in this modern age of warfare is going to be especially important. And so the Signal Corps, which is the branch of the Army charged with all manner of military communications, it dates back to the Civil War era, they're going to need to grow. So the Signal Corps sends troops out looking for places for Signal Corps training camps. One place where they land is in Monmouth County, New Jersey. They stumble across the land where the old Monmouth Park racetrack and hotel had been. This track had flourished during the latter half of the 19th century, during the Gilded Age, when Monmouth County was a place that wealthy people came and, they built their cottages, really mansions, to take advantage of the sea breezes, and, they're looking for things to do. And so the racetrack pops up to entertain them. All the rich and famous people of the day visited this racetrack and luxury hotel, politicians, industrialists, actors and actresses, you name it. Now, this Monmouth Park racetrack and luxury hotel is forced to close in the 1890s when the New Jersey legislature outlaws gambling. They don't outlaw horse racing per se, but people generally don't want to watch horses run in ovals if they're not going to potentially make any money off of it. And so this famous racetrack, they wrote about it in newspapers around the globe. It is deserted. The grandstand, track, and hotel are going to fall into ruin. The hotel will ultimately burn to the ground. The grandstand, which was said to have been the largest in the world at the time, it comes down in a nor'easter in 1899. And the site just, it's largely overgrown. It's ridden with poison ivy. Some portions of it are being farmed. But the Signal Corps, they're out there. They're looking for land for training camps, and they come across this site. And they learn that much of the land they're looking at, they've got their eye on, is owned by a gentleman by the name of Melvin Van Kuren. Charles Corlett, who was leading the search in this area on behalf of the Army, recalled in a 1955 interview that after examining several other sites, he, quote, finally stumbled onto the old racecourse near Eatontown. I found part of the old steel grandstand with 11 railroad sidings behind it, the old 2-mile straightaway track and 2 oval racetracks, all badly overgrown with weeds and underbrush. Upon inquiry, I learned that the land belonged to an old man who lived in Eatontown who was very ill. But when he learned my business, he was anxious to see me. So Charles Corlett, the Signal Corps officer, he finds out that Van Kuren had offered to give the land to the Army free of charge during the Spanish-American War. By World War I, he no longer wants to do that. He's on his deathbed. He wants to sell this land and make some money. He offers to sell them close to 500 acres for $75,000. The Army doesn't want to buy it because they think they only want to use the land for the duration of World War I, so they settle on a lease. Why does the Army, as desperate as they are for Signal Corps training camps, why this site? I just told you, it's overgrown, it's infested with poison ivy. What makes this site appealing to the Army? Well, its proximity to the port of embarkation in Hoboken, which is going to ship massive numbers of troops over to Europe. Proximity to the passenger terminal in Little Silver, so they can get men and supplies in on the trains easily. A lot of good stone roads going to the area from when everybody was traveling there to get to the racetrack, and access to water. You can see it says Monmouth Park on this map right here, and for those of you who are familiar, the Shrewsbury River is nearby, Oceanport Creek is there. You would need water for the troops, right? So this is it. This is the site, Old Monmouth Park Racetrack. So for those of you who are familiar with Monmouth County, of course, there is a Monmouth Park Racetrack today. That's a later iteration. The original Monmouth Park Racetrack was on Fort Monmouth's main post. So the first 30 or so Signal soldiers arrive at what will become Fort Monmouth. Here are some early photos of troop arrivals. The photos that I will show you today are almost all from the Command Historical Office that moved from Fort Monmouth down to Aberdeen Proving Ground when the base closed, as we'll discuss more in a bit. So those are some of the earliest troop arrivals. The installation is actually originally called the Signal Corps Camp at Little Silver or Camp Little Silver, based merely on its location. But the locals refer to it in all manner of ways. Here they're talking about the Monmouth Park grounds. They would call it Camp Monmouth Park. You know, they'd call it all kinds of little colloquial names. General orders dated 17 June 1917 named this gentleman, Lieutenant Colonel Carl F. Hartman, the first commander. For those of you who are familiar with the area, the Oceanport Avenue entrance to the base is Hartman Gate in his honor. You can see on this 1919 map that the earliest troops settled at the Oceanport Avenue end of the base. This is Oceanport Avenue here that I'm pointing out. This is where the earliest base is going to be. It's not until later that they expand out towards Route 35, where those big brick gates are today, for those of you that are familiar with the base. Corporal Carl L. Whitehurst is among the first men to arrive at Camp Little Silver. He recalls that the site appears to be, quote, a jungle of weeds, poison ivy, briars, and underbrush. 129 soldiers are hospitalized with severe poison ivy in July of 1917 alone. Whitehurst writes home that remnants of this old Monmouth Park racetrack seem to be everywhere, but the only structure that provides like real shelter from the weather is a former ticket booth. And that former ticket booth was along Oceanport Avenue. It would have been kind of around here in this more modern aerial. It's undetermined what year exactly the ticket booth wound up coming down. There's the ticket booth up close. You can see it says 1890 there, the year it was built. But the railroads, those nearby railroads at Little Silver, soon brought tents. as well as lumber with which to build barracks. Unfortunately, most of the lumber that arrives is green, and according to Corporal Whitehurst, quote, by the time the wood dried out, it was winter, and in December there were cracks you could put your finger through. The winter of 1917 to 1918 was a tough one, and sometimes snow would pile up on your blankets, coming through the gaps in the boards. Here you can see the early tents, and then the supposed to be temporary wooden construction that followed. Let's go through some of the early construction at Camp Little Silver initially, and then it's going to be Camp Alfred Vale and then Fort Monmouth. Here you can see the mess hall from the outside and from the inside. I love their hats. Here's the enlisted men's barracks, nice and tidy. Here's the officers' quarters, and as you might expect, they're a little nicer on the inside. That's the interior of the officers' quarters. Here you have the library, the barber shop. I love the guys just kind of hanging out in front of the barber shop. The blacksmith, the post exchange, the post office, the Western Union office. I love the haircuts in this one. The Red Cross, and the Knights of Columbus. There was a lot of preoccupation with making sure that the men had wholesome entertainments and that they weren't getting into trouble in their off time. This is a sample of the office space and the rather unassuming initial post headquarters. So I like looking at the photos of the early World War I era growth on the base. I think it certainly illustrates that it becomes like a full-fledged, almost like a town of its own very, very quickly. But what I love even more are photos of the men who served there. This is a great postcard breaking them in at Camp Vale, New Jersey. They certainly worked very hard. They played hard. This is the Camp Vale Jazz Band. You can see up on top they're playing Over There, which would have been one of the most popular songs of the era. There are a lot of romances that spring up between men who are stationed at Camp Vale and local women, a lot of marriages that occurred before deployments. And when I look at photos of men from the World War I era or from any era, I'm always curious about those who didn't return, who didn't make it back to New Jersey. Because ultimately, the camp is going to prepare several battalions for war. You can see the signal school at the bottom, the men on review up top. To give you an example of the head count of the signal soldiers we're training to deploy to the fields, the camp trains some 2,400 enlisted men and 440 officers for war in 1917, and some 1,000 officers and 9,000 enlisted men in 1918. With all of those people living and working in very close quarters, the camp was hit particularly hard with the influenza pandemic that swept the country in September of 1918. As outbreaks occurred, units were quarantined, and then eventually the entire post was quarantined, no one in or out. I find that so interesting, right, since we all recently lived through our own pandemic. Now, the camp is initially formed as a Signal Corps training camp, and we're going to see the Signal School become stationed there. But in addition to training soldiers, research and development is a part of Camp Little Silver, Camp Alfred Vale, Fort Monmouth from the very beginning. The Army wanted its own laboratories, which would be independent of the commercial labs. So you can see, again, the rather unassuming early laboratory buildings. They wind up building 43 structures during the World War I era. for the Signal Corps labs. And the labs have various names at different times, the Signal Corps labs, the Signal Corps Engineering labs, etc. But that is part of the mission from the very beginning. They even had airplane hangars where they were working to test different technologies, primarily air-to-ground radio, to try to ensure communications for the new military pilots. In addition to helping to fight to make the world safe for democracy, as the saying went, the camp was, from the very beginning, a huge economic engine for Monmouth County and for the state of New Jersey. The fort is going to create many jobs on post for local civilians. Especially, I love this, looking at the employment of women on the base. There are all manner of articles in local newspapers about how women in particular were leaving their job at XYZ to go work for the military at Camp Alfred Vale because they were making better money there than they could anywhere else. So there's the hiring of civilian personnel to work on the base. Then there's the fact that the men who are stationed on base have money to spend off post in their leisure hours. Then there's the fact that people are flocking to Monmouth County to say goodbye to their soldiers before they leave, and they're staying in hotels and they're going to restaurants, etc., etc. So it's really interesting that, again, from the very beginning, there is that great economic benefit to having the base here. And that's something that will continue and is hotly debated when the post is mandated for closure in the 21st century. So, Camp Little Silver is supposed to be temporary. It gets renamed, as I referenced, Camp Alfred Vale, in honor of the New Jersey inventor who helped Samuel Morse develop commercial telegraphy, trains several thousand men for war, and then the war ends. Well, now what? The Army decides that, no, you know what? This is one of the best Signal Corps camps ever established anywhere. Look at the infrastructure we built. Look at how well received we are by the community. We're going to keep this camp open. And so the chief signal officer will authorize the purchase of Camp Vale, the main post, in 1919 for $115,000 roughly. And Signal Corps schools that are dotted across the country will consolidate at the site that year. And so Fort Monmouth will, for many, many years, be known as the home of the Signal Corps. Okay, so we're staying. We're a permanent installation now. It is in 1925 then that the base will get permanent status and the name Fort Monmouth in honor of the soldiers of the American Revolution who die at the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse. Okay, so new era in fort history now. We're in the interwar years. The first permanent construction at Fort Monmouth are the barracks building on what's known as Barker Circle here. This is Ocean Court Avenue here. This is the barracks at Barker Circle. They are built in the latter 1920s, and they're named after a cadet, Ernest Barker. He dies in an airplane accident at West Point. Of course, I said the Army has airfields here, and so that was kind of the tie. Permanent construction is going to continue after the stock market crash of 1929 and into the 1930s. And one time I had a student who was like, well, why is the government spending money building these big, beautiful, fancy buildings if we're in a depression? Well, it, again, was putting a lot of local people to work. There's actually a lot of WPA money that goes into the permanent construction. So other early permanent construction here as we move from the 20s into the 30s would include what's known as Russell Hall. This is going to become the headquarters building for a long while. The firehouse on base. This is initially a movie theater, and then it becomes the Post Museum. And while training ratchets down a bit in the interwar years, right, because the U.S. Army, U.S. government is not in the habit of keeping a large standing peacetime army, so training ratchets down a bit, but the R&D mission continues furiously in the interwar years. Perhaps the most famous, most impactful piece of equipment to come out of the Signal Corps laboratories at Fort Monmouth in the interwar years would be the first U.S. aircraft detection radar. As you can see here, the head of the Signal Corps labs at Fort Monmouth, Colonel William Blair, will be awarded the patent for the first U.S. aircraft detection radar after the war. Of course, he can't apply during the war. Why?
Secret.
It's classified, right? So he can't apply. It's not actually going to be until 1957 that he winds up finally getting the patent. So he never really winds up making money off of it, but he does wind up getting the patent for the first U.S. aircraft detection radars. Fort Monmouth radars were actually there and detected the incoming Japanese planes at Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. But the warnings of the radar operators went unheeded. It was very new technology, and so the soldiers, Lockhart and Elliott, they called into headquarters, as they are supposed to do, and they're like, hey, we got something. We got something on the screen. Something's coming. And they're told, it's probably birds or maybe our own planes. Just, your shift is over. Knock off and go. And of course, then, those were the Japanese planes. It is fascinating to look back at accounts from the radar technicians at Fort Monmouth, who first are horrified because they think their technology did not work and didn't detect the planes. And then they're told, no, it detected the planes. They just didn't heed the warnings. John Marchetti, who's one of the radar technicians, 50 years later, he's asked in an interview, when you heard about Pearl Harbor, how did you feel? He said, I was furious. I was furious. The radar that had been built was completely misused. It could have saved lives at Pearl Harbor. It could have changed the picture totally around. Now, I must say, to this day, historians debate what might actually have been accomplished in the time that was allowed. Would they actually have had enough time to respond more defensively, and historians debate that. But the radar technicians at Fort Monmouth certainly felt that if the warnings had been heeded, it could have saved lives. But, of course, it's with December 7th, 1941 that the United States then gets into this second global cataclysm. The Great War was not, in fact, the war to end all wars. And so World War II is going to really significantly impact Fort Monmouth and lead to the development of Camp Evans, where we all are today. Right? America is going to get into World War II hoping to fight the spread of fascism around the globe, and it's going to lead to massively increased training missions. The labs continue their work, but the number of men and women now being trained is going to balloon massively. And so if you look at this top map, this is a map of Fort Monmouth in 1936. It comes to about the arrow here, okay? Everything on this side of Oceanport Avenue is a result of enormous growth to accommodate the World War II missions, as is everything over here that I'm circling on the other side of the arrow, right? So that just kind of shows you the physical plant, the footprint, how much it grows. Tens of thousands of soldiers will train at Fort Monmouth during this conflict at the Signal School, but we also have an officer candidate school, a replacement training center. In fact, the missions that Fort Monmouth is being asked to accomplish, both in training and in R&D, are so great that even with this growth, they cannot contain it on main post. And so they start buying up or leasing chunks of land elsewhere in Monmouth County. So for those of you that are familiar with Monmouth County, in Asbury Park, for example, we take over a number of luxury hotels and convention hall. We buy what's known as the Charleswood area, which is roughly a mile down the road from the main post. We, of course, also get where we are today, the Evans area in Wall Township, which is now a National Historic Landmark and home to InfoAge and the Antique Radio Club and such. If you take a look here, you can kind of see a map that shows you, I'm circling Fort Monmouth here, okay? And then we can see some of the other sites that are going to be used. Here's the Deal Test area. Down here is the Evans area. Okay, so they're gobbling up real estate where they can get it in order to accomplish both their research and development and their training missions. So let me take a little detour here and tell you a little bit about this site specifically. Before the Army comes rolling along during the World War II era, the land that's going to become Camp Evans has a long and varied history. Archaeological evidence indicates that the area was frequented by New Jersey's earliest inhabitants, right, the Lenape, which makes sense as it's located on the Njarc River. As Europeans settle in what's going to become Monmouth County, it'll be dotted with farms. The site that's going to become Camp Evans is roughly 16 miles from the Revolutionary War's famed Monmouth battlefield. If we fast forward to the turn of the 20th century, much of the land that's going to become Camp Evans is still being used agriculturally until the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company of America arrives in 1912. According to a June 1912 Red Bank Register article, the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company of America has bought 4 farms at the head of the Njarc River, consisting of 600 acres. And the rural site will become home to Marconi Wireless's receiving equipment for commercial transatlantic radio operations. Of course, you can see the marker, right, that is available just out of the gate and to the left today. Marconi is going to consolidate its operations at its New Brunswick site, leaving this site where we are today. Unfortunately, there'll be this odd period where the Marconi Hotel, the red brick building that had been built for unmarried Marconi workers, is going to serve as a headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan, which had a rather active presence in the state of New Jersey in the 1920s. The Ku Klux Klan kind of falls apart with the stock market crash here in the state, and the site will next be a college for a short period, King's College, and then, of course, the Army comes along. And as I said, it's in this context of not being able to fit all of its missions on the main post. So from this point forward, when I talk about the technological innovations that are coming out of Fort Monmouth, it's Fort Monmouth and its satellites like Camp Evans here, okay? So we're in the World War II period now, and technological developments during this period include things like early FM backpack radios to provide frontline troops with reliable static-free communications, and near continuous advancements in the radar technologies that I noted came out of the labs in the interwar years. It's during the World War II period that we get our first contingent of female soldiers at Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans. The Signal Corps had actually used women successfully in World War I. They're called the Hello Girls, civilian, well, this is a whole nother hour talk. Were they civilian or were they military? These telephone operators. But during World War II is when you have the, quote, invasion of the fort by stocking soldiers, as they were called. The headline of the Fort Monmouth newspaper, the Signal Corps message that week that women arrived, read, "Vanguard of Women's Army Corps arrives to plan invasion of fort." And the article warns men to straighten their ties and comb their hair because a new impetus has been added to life at Fort Monmouth. And, you know, the newspaper article sounds a little silly, a little tongue-in-cheek, but I assert that the Signal Corps really appreciated the abilities of women in the military, having seen how successful the Hello Girls of World War I were, and that they were particularly interested in using women when the idea of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which then becomes the Women's Army Corps, had everybody in the nation kind of like up in arms. You can read the congressional record, and there are quotes about like, who then will do the washing, the cooking, the humble home tasks to which every woman has devoted herself. That's an actual senator says that. Like, but I suggest that the Signal Corps was actually really open to using women because they knew that they would be successful based on the experience of the Hello Girls of World War I. Also, during the World War II years and forward, the Signal Corps at Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans gains a reputation of being known as the Black Brain Center of the United States. That's not a quote I made up as the historian. This is a title that African American personnel themselves come up with and use. This particular quote here is from Thomas Daniels, who is one of the Black pioneering personnel that serves at Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans. So how does this happen? Well, in the 1940s and the 1950s, it was very difficult for scientific personnel of African-American heritage to get jobs. A lot of applications in the government and private industry called for photos, and if you were a Black man, your application was thrown in the garbage. Fort Monmouth, supposedly, according to interviews conducted by Dr. Robert Johnson with many of these personnel, didn't require a photo and didn't care what color your skin was. They wanted the best and the brightest for their research and development labs, regardless of their heritage, their background. And so Thomas Daniels, who you see here, he says that the post, Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans, quote, provided a place where Black scientists and engineers could find jobs and advance their careers when other research facilities closed their doors to African Americans. If you haven't seen it, over in the Marconi building, InfoH just opened a new professionally designed room that discusses the experience of Black personnel here on site. So great room if you haven't been over there yet. One of these pioneering Black scientists, Dr. Walter McAfee, is critical in helping Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans, because it actually happens here on site, achieve a massive milestone in scientific history on January 10th, 1946, when Signal Corps scientists successfully bounce a radar signal off the moon in Project Diana. It takes 2.5 seconds for them to bounce the radar signal and return, and it was said to prove the feasibility of long-distance communications through space. A lot of people have never heard of this today. At the time, it was put in the same category as the development of the atomic bomb. And Dr. McAfee's mathematical calculations make that possible. So, of course, the training, the research and development happening at Fort Monmouth and its sub-installations like Camp Evans contribute again to the winning of now a second World War. We come into the post-World War II period, and unfortunately the Cold War. Again, we see the training missions shrink, but the research and development missions continue. Camp Evans is going to stay open even with the end of World War II. Camp Evans will actually stay open until the 1990s because the work being done here is so significant. So some of these post-World War II era research and development accomplishments include things like the first weather radar, the first communication satellite, the first weather satellite, the first televised weather satellite. Could go on and on. So many of these technologies are originally developed for military uses and then wind up being adapted for the civilian world. Of course, the first big test of the Cold War, the domino theory, comes with the Korean War, when we are committed to stopping the spread of communism at all costs, lest country after country fall to communism like dominoes. Fort Monmouth's automatic artillery and mortar locating radars will be one of their most significant contributions to the Korean War. The idea is to help soldiers detect the source of enemy attacks and accurately fire back. Other developments making a difference in the Korean War included lightweight field television cameras, pocket radiation detectors, and super small experimental field radios. The trend here is that they keep miniaturizing the communications equipment and pushing it further and further down in the ranks to ensure that more and more troops can communicate accurately with the goal of saving lives. The communications technology, the electronics technology, is going to come so far, in fact, that in 1957, Fort Monmouth decides they are going to discontinue the pigeon service. Of course, what were they doing with pigeons? They were communicating, right? The Army used pigeons with great success in World War I, World War II, and Korea, actually. And the pigeon breeding and training headquarters for the Army is going to be at Fort Monmouth. They do incredible things with the birds. They train them to fly under cover of darkness. They train them to fly two-way missions. They make little cameras that they affix to them with vests, and they take reconnaissance photos. I mean, it is incredible what these birds do. And historians estimate that the birds could deliver like with 90% accuracy. Like, birds are amazing. You've got birds getting awards from foreign countries, from our country. Like, the birds were all the rage. But by the time we get up to 1957, the communications electronics technology has come so far that the Army Signal Corps decides they're going to discontinue the pigeon service. Now, up to this point, when hero pigeons with distinguished service records died, they were often taxidermied, they were sent to museums. Like right now, Cherubim from World War I is on display at the Smithsonian. The hero pigeons who had passed away up to 1957 were taxidermied and sent to zoos where they could be honored properly. When they're going to close, they make a big to-do about how the hero pigeons are going to be sent to zoos around the country. And it's this whole PR thing. Zoos are fighting to get a hero pigeon, and then when the pigeon arrived, there would be a big ceremony to welcome them. And then your average pigeons, they were sold out of Fort Monmouth for, I think it was $5 a pair. And there are photos of people lined up as far as the eye can see to get some of these hero pigeons. Now, I would often get asked, what's your favorite thing in the archive? What do you love? And that's hard, right? It's like trying to pick your favorite child. You're not supposed to do that, you can't do that. It's impossible. But I will say one thing I really loved in our archive was this handwritten letter from a soldier in Vietnam who's writing to the commander at Fort Monmouth and says, listen, sir, I'm paraphrasing, but listen, sir, all of this fancy schmancy equipment you're sending us, it's lovely. But you know what? The batteries die, and the guys can't figure out how to work it, and the weather messes it up. Can we just get some pigeons? Because the pigeons never fail. I just find that so funny. They didn't get their pigeons, but I think that letter, right, really indicates that the men trusted these birds. Now, just two kind of interesting Cold War stories that I would like to tease out for you here. Of course, the Russians launched the Sputnik satellite in 1957. Well, our Deal test area, which I showed you on the map before, is one of the first government installations in the United States to detect and record the Russian signals. So I think that's pretty fascinating. And Fort Monmouth was, regrettably, the site of Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans, he actually comes here, the site of one of Senator Joseph McCarthy's communist witch hunts. He becomes convinced that there's this nest of spies in the Signal Corps, and you've got a number, I think it's several dozen, of Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans employees who are targeted, suspended from their jobs, really, made into pariahs on these totally unfounded claims from McCarthy and his crew. And the Fort Monmouth commander at the time really cooperates. You know, he's all in cooperating with McCarthy. So that's a whole nother story. We could go on, you know, just for an hour about the McCarthy period here. Ultimately, all of the suspended employees are cleared and reinstated. So it's a fascinating story. Of course, we move chronologically into the Vietnam conflict, which is terribly divisive here at home. Fort Monmouth, in this era, it is said, really becomes the eyes and ears of the Army. In the words of one employee, quote, "We had always provided the voice, but the eyes and ears, I think that was the big thing to come out of Southeast Asia." So we're talking about communications electronics equipment, again, to include like the radios, the radars, the mortar locators that we had been providing, but increasingly it's sensors, it's aerial reconnaissance systems, it's surveillance systems, air traffic control systems, night vision devices. These are all kind of in the stable of products that Fort Monmouth is either innovating, acquiring, deploying, etc., to troops in the field. As the 20th century comes to a close, Fort Monmouth personnel are as busy as ever. They are hard at work on Y2K issues. This is another thing my students are always like, wait, everybody really thought the world was going to stop because the clocks were going to change? What? But if you think back, right, it was a very, you know, hectic time. What's going to happen with Y2K? So Fort Monmouth personnel were very involved in kind of planning and preparing for Y2K issues. The fort is going to work round the clock during the Gulf War to liberate Kuwait, equipping soldiers with everything from jammers to night visions, surveillance technology, etc. From the Vietnam War era forward, though, we are going to see the increasing civilianization of Fort Monmouth. It's very complicated. The Army goes through this like reorganization, and instead of being the home of the Signal Corps, Fort Monmouth is going to wind up being the home of the Electronics Command and then the Communications Electronics Command. I don't want to get too in the weeds there, but increasingly it's going to be a civilian workforce versus a uniformed workforce at Fort Monmouth. The Signal School is going to transition to Fort Gordon, Georgia during the Vietnam War era, just because there's not enough space here to accommodate them. There's a great story from one Vietnam era Signal Corps soldier, and he's talking about how he's supposed to be practicing night maneuvers, and he's crawling along on his belly, but he hears the music coming from the bars on Route 35. He's like, it was really ruining the mood. Like, it was just, we were so grown up here in Monmouth County that there wasn't really room for the Signal School to do the things that it increasingly needed to do. And so the Signal School is going to leave, and we become more and more civilianized at Fort Monmouth. It is also in the 1990s, as the 20th century comes to a close, that we start giving away, getting rid of a lot of the land that we had acquired for the increased missions during World War II, right? And so it is in the 1990s, as I mentioned, that we wind up getting rid of the Evans area here because it is deemed better to consolidate everybody now back on the main post. Fort Monmouth enters the 21st century as relevant as ever. In the wake of the 9/11 tragedy, personnel from Fort Monmouth will support rescue and recovery efforts at Ground Zero in New York and at the Pentagon in a variety of ways. For example, you have contractor teams from Fort Monmouth who are deployed to New York City and charged with trying to find survivors in the rubble by locating their cell phones. So right now I could go on my phone and see where every one of my family members is, right? That technology did not exist. This was a classified emergent technology where they were going to try to locate the cell phones of anyone who might have survived in the rubble. Of course, we know now that survivors were so very rare, but at the time they were hoping they could locate survivors. So they deployed that particular device to Ground Zero, and they are able to locate cell phones, but it's largely those of the rescue workers who are on the pile. They also send the world's tiniest infrared cameras, which they attach to pipes and use to look through voids in the rubble, trying to locate survivors. They bring in a laser Doppler vibrometer, which measures the structural integrity of the various piles of rubble to try to warn rescue workers of any pending collapses and minimize the loss of additional lives. And then in Washington, D.C., we send personnel to the Pentagon area to try to set up a communications infrastructure away from the damaged buildings so that personnel can continue their important work uninterrupted. And then, support for troops continues right into the global war on terror that follows 9/11. There are, of course, some uniformed personnel at the fort, right? And certainly they're involved in the conflict. But we are also deploying, these are actually civilians who wind up deploying in order to help maintain the equipment in the field, because the equipment's becoming increasingly complicated and it's increasingly procured and maintained by civilians. So we actually wind up deploying civilians to the field to help ensure that our stable of equipment is working properly for the troops. So the fort is still very, very busy as we come up to, dun, 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 the base realignment enclosure decision of 2005, which is going to mandate that Fort Monmouth proper now close, right? We've been giving off the excess real estate, and now Fort Monmouth proper is told that it's got to close. If you're not familiar, base realignment enclosure is something that the Department of Defense does periodically to assess its real estate holdings and see where it might be able to get rid of land and consolidate things to recognize efficiencies, to save money, whatever. Fort Monmouth had been proposed for closure several times in the past, and it always managed to argue that it was too important, its work could not be done anywhere else, it couldn't be closed. So it had been on the list and got off several times before, but this time it was not meant to be. They decide that Fort Monmouth is going to close, and again, this is a little complicated. Think of like a military installation, like a big town, and there's different businesses that exist in the town, right? So the main military entity at Fort Monmouth at the time the base is going to close was the U.S. Army Communications Electronics Command. That's really who I've been talking about. But there's also like an FBI building there. The United States Military Academy Preparatory School was there. So basically all the tenants there are told, you gotta go somewhere else. Okay? So the main tenant, the Communications Electronics Command, is told that they have to go to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. And so now several thousand employees have to decide, am I moving to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland? Am I quitting my job? What's gonna happen? So ultimately, they built a brand new, massive, like billion-dollar campus for the Communications Electronics Command down at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And personnel have to decide if they're going to go or not. There was a tremendous concern about brain drain. That is, if these highly technical people won't go to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, does that then wind up having impacts on our support to the global war on terror and all the work that's being done? Initially, when they're doing polling to see how many people are going to go, a very small percentage said they would go. Even though they did try to make it appealing to you. There were like bonuses for going. They would send people to pack up your house, and like they tried to make it appealing for you. But initially, a very small number of people was going to go. And then that number did go up and up and up for a few reasons. I think people just came to realize, oh, this is really happening. We're not getting off the list this time. And then, of course, we had the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, which means a lot of people couldn't retire when they hoped to, and so they would have to go down to Aberdeen Proving Ground. So it's a sad, interesting story. Again, we could do a whole hour just on the base closure, but like it or not, all military personnel leave Fort Monmouth by September 2011. They take the archives, they take the museum, but I always say they can't take the history from the state of New Jersey, and as long as anybody will have me come talk about it, I will do so. So thank you for listening to just a little bit of that history this evening. And with that, I will wrap my remarks, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Okay, the zoo's got the pigeons, okay?
Yeah.
Did either pigeons fly back to Monmouth? Was there any record of them?
You know, I have studied this for almost 20 years, and I have never seen that. No, I've never seen an instance of the birds coming back to Monmouth. I guess that wasn't their orders. I don't know. But that is fascinating. I've now studied scores of newspaper articles and memos, and I've never seen an instance of that. That's a great question. Question?
I had a question. What can you say about the guardrail program that was developed here? It's not classified.
So guardrail common sensor system is a suite of electronics equipment that would be put on airplanes to help them kind of navigate and have situational awareness. Yeah, I'm going to keep it brief there. Not because it's classified, because I'm not the best suited person to talk about the technology. Yes, yes. And actually, there are a number of gentlemen. Herman Red comes to mind. I don't know if you know any of these gentlemen. Some of the later generations, in particular, of the pioneering Black personnel that I talked about earlier, who are doing oral histories to document the work that they've done. And I know Guardrail is one of the programs in particular that they're trying to, one, document the history of, and then think about how you interpret it and relay it in a very accessible manner that the average person and students can understand, because that's tricky too. In writing the new book that's coming out, that was one of the things, like, you can get so technical, and you might all appreciate that, right? Like, you're tech people, but the average student, the average person gets lost very quickly when you're using the acronyms and you're using the technical terminology. So how do you relay that very technical equipment in a way that is accessible and engaging for the average person can get tricky. Yes?
What was the relation with Fort Monmouth and Fort Hancock? Was there any relationship?
Yeah, so Fort Hancock actually goes back to the 1800s. It's initially a proving ground. And then when we fast forward a little bit, they are organized separately, but the radar teams at Fort Monmouth do go out to Fort Hancock to do some testing because they need space. So they go out to Fort Hancock and they're using that for radar testing. They actually decide that that is not the most secure location in particular, because there are a lot of U-boats off the coast of the Jersey Shore, and that is why they then move the radar operations here to Camp Evans. So it comes here from Fort Hancock. So we're always kind of like led and organized separately, but we do use their facilities at some points. Yes, sir?
What's left of Fort Monmouth now?
Great question. A lot of the buildings are still there. Some of that earliest permanent construction that I showed you, some of the brick buildings towards the Oceanport Avenue end of the post, those are considered the Fort Monmouth Historic District. They look very similar on the exterior. Now the interiors are being renovated. For example, a lot of the officers' housing has been totally renovated inside. It was just sold as like condos and things like that. Basically what happens, and again, it's very complicated, but they form something called the Fort Monmouth Economic Revitalization Authority, and Fort Monmouth kind of overlays several different towns. So the towns have a seat on this, the state, the Department of Defense, whatever. And they were tasked with deciding how essentially the pie gets carved up and people use different parcels of the land. So the land's being parceled out. If you drive through the base right now, which you can do, you see a lot. It still looks like Fort Monmouth in many ways. The one end of the base closer to Route 35 here in these Johnson Gates, that kind of looks like the scene of a zombie apocalypse. Those were barracks buildings built in, I think, the 50s, and they've been vacant since 2011. They look horrible. The other end of the base has been more redeveloped, and they're doing some great things. There's a brewery out there. Jersey City University is using Squire Hall. So it still looks like Fort Monmouth. A lot of the memorials are still there. That's a whole other story. There are over 100 memorials and markers that were on base. That was one of my jobs as the command historian. I had a seat on the Fort Monmouth Memorialization Committee. We had the records going back to the 1940s of every memorial that had been put on post ever. A lot of them are to Signal Corps soldiers that died during World War II, but there's others as well. And one of the things we had to figure out is, well, what do you do with all the memorials? I didn't want to leave any behind because I was like, if they put a target here and they bulldoze them, that is such an affront to the people that these memorials are supposed to honor. At the end of the day, what wound up happening was some went back to local towns here in New Jersey, some went to other military posts, some went to Aberdeen Proving Ground, but a lot stayed. So like if you drive through the base today, that main thoroughfare through the base is called the Avenue of Memories, and it has all the markers lining the sides of it. So when you drive through the fort, it still looks like the fort. That is going to change pretty soon, I suspect, because Netflix is going to be buying a large chunk of it and bulldozing much of what's there. So I think the end closer to Oceanport, the historic part, will continue to look like Fort Monmouth. They've put up a new memorial, which I love, which indicates that it used to be a military base, and thanks all those who served there. But yeah, so Netflix is supposed to come in soon, and that will change the landscape of the property a good deal. Fun fact about that, and I had an article in the Two River Times about this recently. When I heard that Netflix was coming, I said, the Signal Corps used to make TV and films there. They did it first. And so I love that. I hope Netflix read that. So. Yes?
Speaking of reuse, I heard that RJM, the hospital in Long Range, was going to move on to the location of the old hexagon. Is that true?
That's my understanding. Again, I'm not formally involved with FEMIRA, but that's my understanding, is that they're the ones who took down the hex and that they're going to use that property.
And they're going to move the entire Long Range operation to that location.
Okay. Yeah, I can't formally comment on that.
I have a sidebar question.
Sure.
30,000 square feet in Monmouth University for
Okay.
the books.
Yes, so I mentioned at the beginning that I have a new title recently. I'm the curator of the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music at Monmouth University. We will be building a brand new 30,000 square foot museum building, which will tell the story of American music history more broadly. And then also, of course, we'll have some exhibits related specifically to Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, that New Jersey hero. You may have discussed in past meetings that the museum, your museum, very kindly recently loaned me some early music technology pieces for an exhibit called Music America that the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music curated. It's a traveling exhibit since we don't have our building yet, and it just opened at the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library Museum in Austin. Wow. So yeah, that's a big exciting project, and I'm sure I will bother my good friend Ray Chase and some of you as we work towards the opening of our new museum to perhaps help us with some additional early radio and recording technology. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, everybody.
We would like to present you with the New Jersey Antique Radio Club.
I love it, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
I don't know what to say. You know, it's like, I think we picked the right person for tonight. Huh? All right, so we will continue with these series, and it's going to be hard to top her, I'll tell you that. At Princeton next month, I believe it's the 10th, we will be having a docent who works, or previously worked, at Menlo Park, and he'll be talking about his experiences there. Okay, his name's Chuck Perillo. So please read your broadcaster, read your communicator, get the notes, And please support your club next Saturday, all right? It's our spring meet. Coming out and see what's available to you. Even if you're not buying, come out and just take a look, okay? Support your club. Really appreciate it, and appreciate everybody coming here tonight. Thanks so much. Safe home.
Can I unplug?
Yeah.
Let's